All right. Blessings to all of you out there in Christ Jesus. This is your brother Ron. I'm back at you again with another video. All right, so this is the continuation of the series, the Holy Bible Journeys series. And so we are on the book of Esther, a blessed book, a very encouraging book, a book that is definitely uh, one that describes, as I wrote in the in the title of this video, the fingerprints of God. The fingerprints of God. This is a very special book that describes that because, of course, within the pages, we don't see the mention of the God of Israel or we don't see the mention of God, but we do know that God is in the midst. Specifically when it comes to his people, when it comes to his chosen vessels, when it comes to those that are in covenant with him, those that are intertwined with them, those that love him, those that are, a part of this great plan that he is ultimately accomplishing, the will of the living God. And in reference to the will of God, there is the overall will of God, and then there's the intimate will of God. Intimate in the sense that there is a manifestation of his desires and his plans um, in your life to where you can see the manifestation of his promptings, his unction, his movement in your life through miraculous means. And he wants mankind to operate by faith, this vehicle of faith in which he can be readily seen in one's life. And so the overall will of God is we know what we can see from an aerial view, what we can see when we look in retrospect, what we can see in reference to the different works, the different manifestation of God's works throughout time. In the Bible, of course, we see that. We see, we know that the general will of God is that God is God had sent his son, this only begotten son, to be the very sacrifice for mankind's sin, to then position man to uh, uh, go on a journey of transformation towards their own promotion and reestablishment with the Father forever, so that they can be the children of God and that God can be their God. And so this holy union, this holy reunion manifests, and evil is vanquished and no longer an obstacle, and 100% of good for all existence continues from that point as God ultimately desires. Because he is holy. In him there is no darkness at all. And he comes to vanquish darkness so that everything around him can be light as he is. So, so the overall will of God and the intimate will of God. And so, in one's life, there's the intimate aspects of what God is doing, because he is engrafting the believer into his will, into his design, into his you know, his plan, his pattern, his direction, because he wants man to partake of the good that he has in store for those who endure to the very end. And so in the book of Esther, which is this special book that we see is, so as we've been talking about with the books of the end of Second Chronicles, the end of Second Kings, the end of let's see, of course, in the book of Jeremiah, the book of Haggai, the book of Zechariah, the book of Ezra, the book of Nehemiah that we've gone through, we see what happened was the takeover of the enemy nation Babylon. The enemy nation Babylon comes and takes over and causes the people to go into exile, go into slavery. Some of them perishing, and many of them being brought into a new land, a land to where they would be captives and slaves and would have to submit to a foreign kingdom when they had their own kingdom. But because of the disobedience, because of the sin, because of the rebellion, because of the idolatry, they were taken away from their free state and their free land and placed under bondage in a foreign land. And so what we see is the 70 years that was prophesied through Jeremiah, that would be the ultimate release in waves of some of them back to the land that God had given them originally. And so there are waves. The first wave being led by Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua. And then you would have others who would lead expeditions back. You had Ezra, and of course Nehemiah, would trail and come at a later time after Ezra. And so the book of Esther is special because we have to place what happens in Esther within these books that we've already talked about. We have to place it in reference to its time within specifically the book of Ezra. So in the book of Ezra, we see mention of certain kings, and there is a revelation of what God is doing to set up this grand plan to ensure that the momentum of the establishment of his people, the strengthening of his people, he wants to move pieces. He wants to ensure that they are rightfully set up and empowered and strengthened to continue the very will that he's trying to ensure manifest according to his design. And so this is special. Let's actually, before we even get to the book of Esther, let's look at some scriptures in the book of Ezra and maybe Nehemiah in reference to the reality of what God is doing in reference to this setup. There's this wonderful setup that God is doing, and it's amazing how God is not allowing man to stop it. It's something that he's arranging in a very special way. So let's look at the book of Ezra, chapter 4. Because we know that there is trouble in the book of Esther, but then there was already trouble that was manifesting in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. There were already things that were happening, and they were happening under certain kings. So starting at verses 4, what we see, let's see, verses 4, I'm going to read a few verses, 4 to 7. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus the king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius the king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, wrote Bishlam, Mithridah, Tabel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes of Persia, and the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue. So let's stop right there, because one of the things I want to bring out that we can't miss, this is very critical that we don't read this too fast, because there's an important arrangement here that I believe the writer arranged, but there's an importance in truly dividing the word, rightly dividing the word of truth, so that we can see what it is that God is doing throughout time. So there's trouble in reference to the rebuilding of the temple, the rebuilding of the house of God that God wants built, because this is a place which there will be the sacrificing of the animals and the giving of specific offerings and all manner of things that are important, because there needs to be an atonement, a giving of a sacrifice for the sins of Israel, the sins of the people. So there are atonements that would wash away the current condition of the people temporarily, so that they would not be an offense to God. So these ceremonial, these rituals, these specific mandates that God had placed on the Levites, the priests, to continually do, was something that was important to maintain their relationship with God. And so so as this is happening, we see that in reference to the pattern of things, Cyrus, prophesied by name. Of course, we see in the book of Jeremiah that's mentioned. Cyrus is the first one, because God had given him all the lands of the earth. God had given him, dominion throughout the world, or his section of the world. And he said that God had charged him to build a house in Israel, build this temple, build this place of sacrifice and worship. And so he sanctions the resources, the specific things that are needed. He releases the people, certain measures of people to go back. He ensures that this plan carries out. So he is a used vessel to advance the will of God. And so then it says here, Cyrus, the king of Persia, so the trouble, the frustrating of the purposes of God were happening during the reign of King Cyrus of Persia, even until the reign of Darius of Persia. But there are kings in between, or at least one king, Artaxerxes, in between Cyrus and Darius, who is the one who is frustrating the works, or the one who was baited into commanding that the works be stopped, commanded that the temple cease from being built. And so what we see here is, then it says, and in the reign of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is who we're going to be talking about today in reference to the king of Persia, who is the king of Esther, the husband of Esther here. And it says, in the beginning of his reign, beginning of the reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So within the first, because we know because the book of Esther starts at the third year of his reign, but there are accusations, and there is a environment of hostility, a corruption, a aggression against the Jews that is in the area. And so complaints are made to Ahasuerus before Esther when he is with Vashti. There are complaints that are being made so that they can continually frustrate the works of God that the children of Israel are doing. So why is it saying Artaxerxes in verse 7 when Artaxerxes is really in between Cyrus and Darius? So Cyrus is the first king. Then you have this Artaxerxes that is spoken about in verse 7. And it talks about the people that conspired and basically persuaded him to stop the work, to cause the work to be stopped in reference to the building of the temple. And so it says it this way because, or the writer writes it this way because he's listing the good kings first. He's listing Cyrus, who was a benefit to the will of God. He's listing Darius, who was a benefit to the will of God. He's listing Ahasuerus, who was a benefit to the will of God. Different times, but of course they were all individually a benefit to the will of God. And then it, after that, begins to talk about Artaxerxes. This Artaxerxes here specifically that is being prompted by these counselors, chancellors, being prompted by these individuals to cause the work that had started through Cyrus to cease. But then after him, or we don't know how many kings per se were in between Cyrus and Darius, but after Artaxerxes that's spoken about here from verses 7 on down, you have Darius who comes in and he does research. He does research in reference to what the state of things were, and if there was an actual decree, scrolls are found, and what happens is ultimately there's a recommencing of the building of the temple. There's a reestablishing of the work of God that continues at this point. And so Darius is a valuable tool to recommence the work of God, to restart the temple, because it ought to be built. And so God is using individuals to do this. And so so the book of Esther begins, if we were to place the book of Esther somewhere in the Bible in reference to the order of events, we would have to place it at the end. Let's see. We would have to place it in between in between chapter 5 of the let me see here. No, we would have to place it in between chapter 6 of the book of Ezra and chapter 7, in between. And so there's a measure of time that is in between. And so we see that after Darius, the next blessed king is the king of Esther, Ahasuerus. Even though the people of the land, who were trying to hinder the work, they were trying to get after. They knew they they could not persuade Darius to stop the work, because of course Darius is the one who recommences the work. So now the next king comes on the scene, King Ahasuerus. They begin to complain and try to stop the work through this new king, Ahasuerus. prior to his um, marrying, prior to his placing Esther as the queen over the Medo-Persian Empire. And so this is important because we are seeing the fingerprints of God, the works of God, and God gives His servants the grace to perceive the fingerprints of God, the works of God. God told Moses what happened in the beginning. The fingerprints of God were seen by Moses in the beginning, and he was able to write the book of Genesis, or write the something amazing and miraculous, which is the days of creation, able to perceive from God and hear from God what happened day after day. Specific, he's giving details in reference to what happens, and so seeing the miraculous work of God and allowing God to pour in revelation to see how he is working, what he is doing, what he's setting up before it comes, the things that he's anointing or blessing, the things that he's loving or hating, blessing or cursing, the different things that God is doing. He wants to be established because he is bent on establishing the will that he is ultimately engrafting his sons and daughters into, as they also participate in this great plan to ensure that people are resurrected from the dead and beating the very limitations that he created originally on earth. Because we are not supposed to be limited to the temporary things of the earth, the natural things of the earth. God wants us to participate and be inhabitants of the grand inheritance that he is setting up in advance, that he's going to ultimately position the sons and daughters of God to obtain and retain for his own glory. And so that's a blessing. So that's where the book of Esther takes place, because we have to say that, because we see that Ezra benefits from this. By the time Ezra comes in, we know that he is benefiting. Yes, he is a man of God, and God is giving him favor and strength and all manner of things. But we know that what the book of Ezra speaks about Ezra in chapter 7, that's a manifestation of the scenario that has already happened in reference to the first 10 chapters or the 10 chapters of Esther. And so now Ezra is a product of the blessing of the king. Nehemiah is a product of the blessing of the king. And in the book of Nehemiah, it even mentions that the queen is next to the king. And we know when it mentions that, it's talking about Esther. By this time, he's well into his reign, because we know it's 3 years. Year 3 is when the book of Esther starts, and then we know at year 20 of Ahasuerus' reign is where Nehemiah is positioned to be an authority in Judah, and so So there's time in which God is working through individuals, working through Ezra, working through Nehemiah, working. He's moving the hearts of kings. He's moving this woman who is, Esther, who is in a sense, a nobody in a sense. She's Hadassah. She's not, in position to be used by God on a grand scale, but God shifts things to ensure that she's going to be used by God to keep the favor going so that the children of Israel can continue this building project, can continue the establishment of the temple of God, the wall of God, the wall of Jerusalem, the houses and the cities, the city of Judah, Jerusalem. So there's a need for the will of God to continue, and God is doing things. He's replacing, he's establishing, he's blessing, he's moving out of the way. He's doing a multitude of things to ensure that nothing is interrupting his grand will, his grand plan to ensure that the Son of God comes on the scene to ensure that the necessary sacrifice for mankind is in position to manifest, so that mankind can be saved, so that Jesus can lead captivity captive, lead mankind in the in a sense, paradise, in the stagnant place that they are in, and then journey into the gates of heaven, journey into the next phase of eternal resting place, which will then blossom ultimately in the end to the earth being the eternal resting place of all those that enjoy the inheritance of eternity. So, so let's get into the book of Esther. Let's get into the book of Esther. Um, so this it was a necessary backdrop to show that this is a plan that God is setting up to ensure that the queen, Esther, is going to be a benefit, who she is a Jew, and she's going to be a benefit to the Jews. She's going to be a benefit to the children of Israel. She's going to be a benefit, and the people of God are going to enjoy a continuation of their legacy. So, the book of Esther, it says right here at the beginning, and it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India, even unto Ethiopia, over 720 provinces. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, which is 6 months, 180 days, 6 months, half the year. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So 7 days for the people, allowing them to enjoy the festivities, the grand benevolence and blessing of the king, the sharing of the festivities and a banquet for the people in a sense. Um, uh, where white, so it describes the elegance, it describes the elegance, it describes the fashion of it, the different colors that are being described as far as the curtains and the marble and the pillars and how the pavement was and the vessels of gold. And so it's a very elaborate setup. And so they're describing this this half of the year period in which he's setting up this grand elegant banquet for these princes, for the princes of the lands around him that are under his jurisdiction. And so he's, allowing this festival to commence. And so in verse 9, it says, also Vashti the queen made a feast for so before that, I do want to mention here in verse 8 where it says, and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. And so, that can vary in reference to how much a person drinks and what their body is able to handle, whatnot. But it goes into how Vashti also had her own gathering, her own celebration of the women of these men, the women of these princes, the women of royalty. So she was entertaining them as King Ahasuerus was entertaining the princes and the nobles of the lands. And so it says in verse 10, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bistha, Harbana, Bigtha, and our Abtha, Zethar, Carcass, the seven chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshina and Shethar and Amatha and Tarshish and Miris and Mersina and Memucan, the seven princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom, was what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all the women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti, the queen, be brought in before him, but she came not. So we can read more. We will read more by the grace of God. But what we see is happening ultimately is while this festival, while this feast is happening, you have, as it says here, the king is at this point, after 7 days, he's merry with wine. He's possibly not drunk. We wouldn't say that, but he is, liberated to a degree. He's enjoying himself. And so this is a pagan king. This is not, this kingdom doesn't represent the standards of Israel. They are not bound by the laws of Israel, but of course they do have standards, because they are a kingdom, and those in those high positions, they do have standards. They do have discernment. They do have levels of composure and grace that they display as a way of conduct about them. And so the thing is, the king in his happy state, he's requesting that the queen put on her royal crown and be ushered into the presence of the king by these chamberlains, in the midst of all the people, so that the people can see the beauty of this queen. And she refuses, and we don't know the specifics or the justifications to why she believes that she doesn't have to show herself before the king, but she does that, and the chamberlains bring back this news, and the king is upset, and ultimately, and possibly, maybe, she didn't want to be paraded around, because maybe she knew the condition of the king and the princes and the nobles, or maybe she didn't want to be taken away from those that she was serving, those that she was entertaining, and she saw it was an opposition and whatnot. But regardless of the fact, she resisted the king. And so because she resisted the king, now the ordaining of her replacement had to happen. And so, but on a grander scale, as we're talking, we are seeing that this is a shifting of pieces, a shifting of situations, a putting a open door for a woman now, who would be an advocate for her people. She would be an advocate. She would be a piece that would help save her people. So this is more about Esther than it is about Vashti. This is more, of course, the book is called Esther, but this is about the handiwork of God, in the sense that God wants to do a supernatural work to continue the high authority favor for his people, to continue this building of Jerusalem, this building of Israel, building of Judah, so that the legacy on his people can remain established, intact, so that they can be built up, even though God was the one who caused them to be cast away. He is able to regenerate them again, to make them holy again, to make them righteous again. And he's bent on doing that, and he's shifting, and he's using pagan authorities to do so. We know he used Nebuchadnezzar to bring judgment, and he's going to use King Ahasuerus to bring restoration. He used King Cyrus. He used King Darius. He used King Ahasuerus, as we said, and there was kings in between that were the ones that were manipulated to attempt to frustrate the works of God, but those being Artaxerxes and and the ones that caused the conspiracies, the Sanballats, the Tobias, the Gershoms, and the others, the chancellors. All of these individuals, they were the ones that were fighting against the will of God. So because of that, God had to move them out of the way and to ensure that his will was being accomplished. But in that, there was a strengthening of the people of God, a reliance on God, a trusting in God that would manifest the glory of God through the will of God being established. And so Israel was to be saved. Israel was to be moved forward because they were the firstborn, the promise that God was establishing, and he was giving them the power to ensure that there was a solidifying of what God had started from the beginning. So Queen Vashti is taken out of the way, and we see a setup is manifesting. So now Memucan is the one who answers the king and causes and says what the decree should be. It's solidified by the king, but then you have later on the king remembers the decree against Vashti, remembers what happened, remembers the situation, and sees that the Medo-Persian Empire is queenless. There is no queen in the land, and he desires that there be a one that rivals his glory. There's that counterpart, that the contemporary, the one that is a wife, a woman that has the highest woman authority next to him in the kingdom, because she is a beauty. She or the person to take that position, more than what she looks like. There's a beauty that the queen will possess and have because of the role, because of the grace on her life, the character that we see Esther will exhibit much better than Vashti did. So let's look at verses. Let's go to chapter 2. As we just stated, verse 1, it says, "After these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what he had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden which pleased the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, one of the latter kings of Judah. I believe that's Jehoiachin, who whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass when the king's commandment was decreed, and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women, and the maiden pleased him, Esther, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. And so I'm going to read just a few more verses here, because we want to talk about this process. And one of the things about process is we're talking about, in reference to the children of God, the process that the children of God go through prior to meeting the King. We, as children of God, have to meet the King of all kings, Jesus Christ. We have to meet the Father. And so the Father who's on the throne, and Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who sits next to the Father, as it describes that in Revelations, the book of Revelation. It's important that we grow and mature and develop and become who God designs and desires for us to be and become, because we are fit to be who God. We are fit to be within the holy presence of God. The Bible says, make our calling and election sure, in reference to the work that God has desired that we do on the planet, so that this can be one of the elements that qualifies us, because we are, as Jesus said we should be, we are occupying until he comes. We are doing the very work, participating in this grand will that he's establishing by his Spirit. And so there is the need for the people of God to be prepared to become the people by faith that God wants us to become, that he's given us power to transform into. The Word of God says in the book of John, but as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, not those that are born of the will of man, or the will of the flesh, or any other thing, but those that are born of the Spirit. The Word of God says in the book of Romans chapter 8, that those that have the Spirit of God, or those that walk in the Spirit of God, are the sons of God. So there is a walking in the Spirit. There's a fulfilling of the acts of the Spirit, and not fulfilling the lust, not fulfilling the desires of the flesh. And so God is preparing the children of God to be able to house the type of character that will be invited into eternal life. And so and I'm comparing this with this natural process of transformation. This natural process of transformation. Let's read a little bit. Verse 12. It says, "Now when every maid, now when every maid's uh, turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus after that he had been after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months of oil of myrrh, and 6 months of sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Uh, then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. And in the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Shagaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delight in her, and that she were called by name. And so the king would have his way with the women that he meets, that were completed that had completed their 12-month process of purification, and that describes a unity, that describes a oneness, a blessing, that describes an acceptance, that describes a graduation in a sense, and so that's a blessing. But there would only be one queen in reference to this natural process here. But we know Jesus makes us all, those that endure to the end, he makes us uh, kings and priests. We're all kings and priests, regardless of our gender. We're kings and priests that rule and reign with Jesus Christ forever, 1,000 years, and then on to forever. And so um, this process of transformation, because Hadassah, Esther, she is of a different class. She's of a different social class. She's a regular person. She is a person that, does what Mordecai tells her to do. Mordecai is her parent, who has adopted her because of her parents dying. And of course, that was a tragedy. But Mordecai, takes her in, and he raises her as his own daughter. And they're not rich; they're captives of the nation. They're Jews from a foreign nation, from another nation, from their nation, but they're under the control of a foreign nation, and they're not of high regard. They are, her work is probably, cleaning where they live, and ensuring that she, maintains the house, and maybe cooks and makes great meals for Mordecai, and it lays out his clothes for him, and probably goes and takes buckets of water and ensures that there's certain resources that are there. She probably uses the money that Mordecai earns, and purchases what the house needs, so that so they can have and live. And so her going through this purifying stage is a is a it's going up the social status or ladder, in a sense. She goes from no one to the queen. Even before she's the queen, like just being a candidate possible to be queen, she goes through this 12-month process of having to, take a bathe, and or enrich her skin with the types of oils, the types of fragrances that would make her pleasant, that would make her smell pleasant before the king, that would, her life is transformed. She has maids that will help her to become this transformed person. She's a virgin that is going to be presented before royalty, as the Christian is being presented before royalty, before the King of Kings, who makes us and gives us the titles that he gives us. And so she has to learn some things, because she's going from one social status to the next. She's going from, you know, having to learn how to sit properly, not slouching. She has to learn decorum. She has to, be able to discern on a different level. She has to, make sure she's properly clothed. She has to make sure she doesn't, you know, she has to, if she has something on the ground, she has to go through classes. All these women have to go through classes to stop doing what they used to do. In reference to, maybe something falls on the floor, they can't just bend over and pick it up. They have to kneel down. They have to have a level of elegance about themselves, a level of proper posture. They have to, there's in the world, there's names of people that are called debutantes. People who are from rich families, and they know how to conduct themselves around important people. They're not going to walk straight through two talking men or a group of men. They're going to walk right through them, because they have to get to the other side. They're not going to chew gum loudly. They're not going to belch and burp. Sometimes I can be guilty of that. Sorry, I just put myself out, but sorry. But there's a level of grace that they have to walk in, that uh, um, they have to become new people. They have to know the posture of a queen. They have to know the grace in which uh, uh, they ought to, that they're being coached into. They have to know how to function, how to respond to the king, how to wait for him to stop talking before they start talking, or they have to understand, things. Um, of course, there's the law to where you can't go uh, um, into the room where King Ahasuerus is without prior knowledge, without invitation, without you making yourself prior known, to where, because of course it's a safety measure. It's a safety measure. They're trying to make sure that no one runs, or no one comes to the king unannounced, that would ultimately be a problem or a threat to his life. So the response is death to those who come before the king with unannounced. I remember there's a sister in the Lord who had a wonderful dream. She had a blessed dream in reference to, she had a heavenly dream to where she was running. All I remember is she was running towards the Father. She's running towards the Father. She's trying to touch the Father. She's trying to ask the Father questions, and like, this is God. So she's running, and she's trying to approach him and touch him, and just bask in his presence. And all of a sudden, as she's running towards the Father, she all of a sudden is knocked out of her momentum. Her forward momentum is immediately stopped, and she's pushed back by this gigantic angel, Michael, who stands before her and is giving her the look as if to say, where are you going? You can't approach the king like that. You can't approach the father like that. You're not, you don't have the access, or you don't have the permission. And so I thought that was amazing, because it's just a reflection of the the immense importance, um, the fact that you can't come unauthorized before God, and so even natural man has certain aspects of that. A person who owns a company. I mean, you can't find the CEO. Physically, you can't find the CEO. You have to go to managers. You have to go to managers. You have to go to the other employees, lower employees, who can get you in contact to higher employees, who will get you in contact with higher employees that will ultimately put you on the phone, not even physical face to face with the CEO. And maybe, of course, you may, see the CEO face to face after a multitude of obstacles that you have to go through. And so how much more heaven? How much more the Father? There has to be an appointment. so, so, so all these women have to go through this decorum training. Have to go through, the understanding. And it's, why do they have to go through the decorum training? Why do they have to go through the rigorous training of changing their posture, changing the way they operate from the casual lower ways that they used to do, at their lower social statuses, to the more perfect ways of how they respond and react to things in reference to the higher social statuses that they enter into? Why is that even important? Why do people even do that? Like, is that can be just vain. That can be just vain, but there's a truth in it. There's a value in it, because we see that's one of the reasons why we as Christians, why we dressed modest, because we are protecting value. We're protecting value because a woman should not be dressed in a way to where she is revealing her glory. I'm not talking about the glory of her head, but her body. Her body is for her husband. And so this is why I was talking to a sister recently, and she was giving me revelation, in reference to how levels of modesty works. And of course, my wife, helps me understand as well, the different aspects of modesty and how it ought to, how how there are stages of it, and women have to, ultimately grow in that. Of course, men as well. Men as well ought to have levels of modesty about themselves that reflects them also protecting their glory. And so men and women go through a sanctification, um, a level of a sanctifying of our souls, which manifests on the outside. And so the modesty comes from the transformation that's going on in the inward parts, in our hearts. And so we're protecting the glory. We're protecting the glory. There's as I was talking recently, women have to protect their definitions at times. So some women are different than other women. So you have to protect, or cover certain aspects of you that others who may not have those certain dimensions, they may not have to cover that. So it's not just a covering of your body, which is something priceless and a blessing and something that God gives to mankind. Husband and wife, such a beautiful covenant and beautiful union that God has placed on earth. Um, so there's uh, an understanding of the fact that it's not just the covering of the body, it's also the wearing your clothes in such a way to where you're covering the definitions of your body, because that's not where, because many people like to flaunt their definition. So you'll see them, they'll be all covered up, but yet you can see exactly how they would look like, naked. You can see that, like, a man of God doesn't want to see that. Or on the man's side, the woman of God doesn't want to see that. The woman of God doesn't want to see your stomach, muscles, your chest, your arms. No, the woman of God wants to be who she is and grow in the direction of who she's going to be, and the man ought to do the same thing, growing in the direction that he ought to be. And so there ought to not be um, half modesty, but we do know that there is a growth in that. There's a growth in that. So we don't force people. We understand that God reveals to people. God reveals to people, and there is a understanding on how they should conduct themselves. And so we see these women, as we were talking about, that are going from one stage of societal structure, of conduct, of attention to the right posture of doing things, to another level. And so they have to go this next level, because they're going to be around other princes. They're going to be around princes. They're going to be around nobles. They're going to be around the wives of these, nobles and these princes. They're going to be in a completely new environment, and so they have to ensure that they are acquainted, that they're aware of their environment, and that they can adjust and become what their environment has called them to become. And so the children of God are the same, in the sense that we are protecting our glory, as these women are, and we are maturing into the individuals that God designed us to be. So we know that it requires this level and that level and this thing and that thing and this. It requires a multitude of changes, a multitude of shifting, a multitude of characteristics that ultimately reflect the nature of God, the Spirit of God at work in us. And so that's a beauty. And so as we continue with the book of Esther, we see that she is crowned queen, and she was crowned queen before she was even crowned queen. Haggai, he already saw something in her. He saw how beautiful she was on the outside, but he also saw a difference and gave her favor in reference to her character, reference to certain attributes that she probably exhibited on the inside, in reference to her conversation. And so her humble beginnings positioned her to be humble before this chamberlain. So she had this conduct, this attitude that made her beauty even more attractive. That's a blessing when your beauty is emphasized by character, by a strengthening of your character. So that's something that the children of God are growing into. We desire that, we want that, and we are steadily making moves and changes to ensure that we're exemplifying the characteristics that will manifest the beauty on the inside, on the outside, through our actions, through our conduct, through our ways, so that God can ultimately be pleased. And so we see that at the as she's being crowned queen. Um, um, let's see here. So it says here, so Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus unto that royal house in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the seventh seventh year of his reign. So this was 4 years after the this grand festival that he had with the princes and the nobles. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all the princes and his servants, and even Esther's feast. And he made a release of the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred, nor her people, so she didn't describe that she was a Jew yet. Mordecai strictly charged her to ensure that she didn't disclose her origins, because as we said, they were not favored. Uh, there was a tension against them. That there was many different obstacles over time. As we said, during the time of King Cyrus, even though they had favor from Cyrus, that there were trouble from the people of the land. And then you have Artaxerxes, who they convinced that the people of Israel were a problem, would rebel like in the past. And so Artaxerxes stopped the work from being accomplished. And then, over a decade and more later, you have uh, Darius, who does the research, puts the work back into motion, and then you have Ahasuerus later, who hears and is being petitioned by the people again, to hinder the work, to hinder the forward movement of these people. And and Esther comes along. So God is moving and shifting. Esther comes along to accompany the king, and she's going to be used as a tool to shift the heart of the king towards the favor of God's people. So there's a favor that's going to continue on them because of the special pieces that God is arranging uh, towards this predestined plan to ensure that his people are not just saved, but that they're blessed and that they continue in the design in which he wants them, because of the covenant that he made long ago with Abraham and with Isaac, with Jacob, and cause it to blossom through others, and Moses and Joshua, and doing a multitude of things that disclose his fingerprints throughout time to ensure that these people were blessed as they would journey through their lives. Um, And it says verse 21. So we encounter Mordecai. Mordecai now is being more talked about. Mordecai is in front of the king's gate. He wants to see what's up with Esther. You know, he wants to ensure that um, she's okay, and she's in a grand position as the right hand or the wife of the queen of King Ahasuerus. And but there's a situation to where there's a plot to murder the king. And what happens is Mordecai hears of this plot by these two men that want to kill the king. And so what happens is Mordecai tells the queen, and the queen, ensures that the king knows of this plot against his life. And what happens is these two men are found and judged and killed for their treason. And it's written in the Chronicles of the King Ahasuerus, that Mordecai saved the day. And so this instance would come back. There's things that we do as Christians, as people of God, that come back and present us in a light that God wants the people to see. God wants, the people of God to be looked at as. And so Mordecai is in this position to where he's a hero. He foils the plan of individuals that wanted to stop the life of the king. This king that would be used for the work of God to continue. So this pagan king had to be protected, because the God had already begun to move on behalf of the Jews, on behalf of the Israelites, to ensure that they had the necessary favor to ensure that the work was continued. So, what if these two men would have succeeded in killing Ahasuerus? This would have been a problem, because now the next king, probably would have not had favor on Esther, would have not probably, desired her, maybe wanted somebody else. This would have been a problem. This would have been a hiccup in the plan in reference to what God was setting up. But God now had to protect a pagan king, because he was positioning this pagan king to be joined with a woman that was a Jew, that was an Israelite, that would ultimately be a powerhouse that would save the children of Israel in reference to their works, their plans that was being done afar off, their plans that were being done afar off in reference to the continuing of the supplying of Israel, and the ensuring that the mandates were met. All of the necessary things were built and done towards the glory of God. And, of course, we have Ezra that comes on the scene, with the favor of the king and the queen. And you have Nehemiah comes on the scene with the favor of the king and the queen. There's a blessing that they have, and the blessing is more. There's more of a fervency of their blessing than those before them. There's a more of a stronger blessing that's on a strength that's on Ezra and Nehemiah than Zerubbabel. There was of course there was the ultimate causing them to rebuild what God wanted built. But God was shifting again, shifting, and his fingerprints were being seen in reference to what he was moving around to ensure that the solidifying of the work was being accomplished. So this new character comes into play. This man named Haman. He comes into play in chapter 3. And I'm going to start off at verse 1 where it says, "And these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, or the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him, and all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why transgresseth thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai, showed him the Jews. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said unto the king Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of this business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee. The people also do to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and the governors that were over every province, and to keep, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writings thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of the king Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day and the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given to Shushan the palace And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So what's happening is Haman has a plot. He has a plan. He has a deceptive, a sinister plan to cause not just Mordecai, but the people of Mordecai, cause the entire Israelite nation that is in presence in the kingdom, cause them to ultimately be killed, and their things to be taken away, to be a ransom, to be a spoil for those that kill the people. And he's giving a ransom. He's even saying that there's going to be silver involved, money involved, and he persuades the king to do so. And the king trusts in Haman and gives Haman the ring, this royal ring, to wear. The signet of the ring is pressed into, I guess, whatever ink or clay or whatever substance that they want, to ensure that the people know that this is an official letter. This is not a letter from someone that is masquerading as the king. This has the king's sign on it, and it's official. And so this plan stems from the actions that Haman had done. So Haman, no, it's the actions that Mordecai had done against Haman. So Haman is an authority in the Medo-Persian Empire. He was promoted by Ahasuerus. And so now what happens is you have this commandment to where King Ahasuerus wants the people to bow to someone who has his authority on them. So Haman has the king's authority on him. He is someone who will parade possibly through the area. And so when people see him, they have to bow to him as they bow to the king. They have to bow to this man. But you have this individual, Mordecai, who chooses not to bow because he's a Jew, because of whatever reasons. But the reality is that there's a law in place. And should he have bowed? Well, that's debatable. I believe he doesn't want to bow because he believes that this is a violation of his faith. He believes that this is something that God would not be pleased with to some degree. Maybe he sees something in Haman that he doesn't want to bow to, but he ultimately does not bow to Haman. So Mordecai becomes public enemy number one in the eyes of Haman because of Haman's aggression, because of Haman's desire for control, desire for him to be reverenced by the people. And this is technically a breaking of the law. This is a breaking of the law because it's not as if Haman made the law or the request. Ahasuerus, told the people, he caused that this act of reverence to Haman would be done by the people. So this was something that, according to their foreign laws, the king, Ahasuerus, this Medo-Persian Empire laws, that should have been done. this was a breaking of the law. And so for him not to do this, Haman, in a sense, is justified to some degree. But the problem is there's a problem in the situation. The problem is that Mordecai is a Jew. Mordecai is not a regular Joe. He's not someone who is, just, you can just kill this guy and just throw his body away. This is not, an individual that is, um, you know, something that he can make an example of per se. This individual has legacy tied to him. This individual has glory, has God who is responding to his stepdaughter. Esther is already being used in this equation. Mordecai had already been used in this situation. Um, you know, Ahasuerus is being used in the situation. So there are supernatural shiftings and things that are already happening to protect the mission. And so for Haman to be so angry to the degree that he wants to not just kill um, Mordecai, but also the entire population of Israelites, now he's in for something that he does not understand what uh, he's asking for. He's in for something far greater than his anger for the violation of the law can justify. It's bigger than this, but he doesn't realize that it's bigger than this. So he has the ring of the king. So he's plotting and putting things in order to ensure that not just so that he wants other people to do the dirty work, the people of the nation. He wants them to kill the Jews, kill the people that are the sons and daughters of God. And so now what's going to happen is we are going to see that God is going to put in motion another plan to ensure that there is an eradication of the plot of Haman. Because God wants to save his people because his people are connected to his plan. His plan is connected to his own glory. His own glory is connected to the reward of the people that he uses. So what's going to happen is he needs to take away the one who's unaware of the grand plan. Um, so we see in chapter 4 that there becomes Mordecai, he hears of the plot, he hears of the plan. All of Israel hears of it because it's posted everywhere. Everyone knows it, and of course there was already levels of animosity towards the Jews already. As it said in the book of Ezra, that there were complaints being made. There were things that are being petitioned against the Jews in the early days of King Ahasuerus, prior to the acquiring of Esther. So God pushes Esther into the equation because Esther is going to be the saving grace on them all. Esther is going to be the one that's going to bring unity and protection over her people. But God has to do it through the faith of Esther. He has to do it in such a way that she is willing to collaborate with him. and ultimately save her people from eradication of Haman's plot against them. Mordecai, he's in sackcloth and ashes. He's before the gate, King's Gate. He's wailing, he's screaming, he's bitterly crying. He's 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 probably saying woe to himself, woe to the Jews, woe to the children of the promise, the children of the kingdom of God, the firstborn through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's all types of words that he's saying. He's talking about Moses. He's talking about Joshua. He's talking about the deliverance from Egypt. He's his prayer, whatever he's saying, he's saying some stuff because he's trying to call on the God that gave them the purpose from the beginning. And that God is going to respond because that God is trying to protect what he wants ultimately done as far as his will. And um, so let's read some of the behind the scenes acts that are being done to connect the dots to ensure that the people of God are saved. So this is going down to um, let's we're there's some back and forth talk between messengers from Esther to Mordecai and Mordecai to Esther, messengers trying to communicate both sides perspectives, both sides answers concerning the situation, the grave situation that the children of Israel are under. And I'm going to start at verse 7. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to be destroyed. The money that was on their heads, the price that was on their heads. They had a bounty. Also, he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, um, and to decree and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him and to make request before him for her people. And Hattach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Hattach and gave him commandment unto Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. Think these are very powerful words. Think not with your thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. He's saying, don't think that your high position, don't think that you're sacred, you're lofty, don't think that your position is going to save you. Don't more than the Jews, because the Jews look more vulnerable than you. And he's saying that don't think that you're going to be safe from the consequences that are going to come on us if salvation doesn't come for us. And he continues and says, for if thou altogether holdeth hold thy peace, if you don't say anything at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He's prophesying and saying that if you don't help us, then someone else is going to help us and cause the enlargement, cause the deliverance, the saving, the salvation for us to come about. Someone else, if you don't help, someone else is going to help, because there is a blessing, a mandate, a glory on us that has to be covered and protected by God. And he's going to choose someone else to do it. But he says that, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And he says, so the name of your father's house, the legacy, the people, the blood of your father's house will be forgotten. Will be forgotten of God. It won't be something that's written in the chronicles of heaven. And so he's saying that, so this is the time for you to help us. This is, and he says, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. He's saying that this is the supernatural predestined plan of God to save us, which makes sense of the reason why you out of all people were chosen to be the queen. It was not your beauty. It was not your conduct. It was not your character. It was the divine will of God to put you in position. And so because God divinely chose you to be in this position, he wants to use you to fulfill this. He desires to use you to fulfill this. And so you have to be the one to ensure that you're in position to fulfill this. And he's saying that this is the supernatural ordained plan of God. And so it's now or never. And so then Esther bade them to return to Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me. Fast you, all you guys, fast for me. And neither eat nor drink, drink 3 days, day or night, for her, for Esther. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So you have people that are breaking the law. You have Mordecai, who breaks the law. You have Esther, who's about to break the law. And they're going to fulfill the will of God. They're going to fulfill the covenant of God. They're going to fulfill the continuation of the mandate on the Jews through their actions. They're going to be used of God to do major work to ensure that the people continue in the blessing. And so there is a wonderful truth in this, in the sense that they're praying. They have to pray for her. They're praying for her. Esther's asking, soliciting for their prayers. She wants them to petition the God of Israel on her behalf. She doesn't know whether this is going to mean her death. She doesn't know whether this is going to mean her rejection. She doesn't know whether this is going to mean, the variety of things that it could mean for her. She doesn't know, but she knows that what Mordecai said was true. This makes sense now to her. Begin the process towards the saving of the Jews. And so she has to do something. So like the people in the book of Acts were praying for Peter's release. They're praying for Peter's release, that they want Peter to be released so that Peter can continue the mission. In the book of Acts, chapter 12, it's describing the torment, the killing of James, the brother of John, and not the apostle James. It's so the church is being persecuted, and so Peter is a vital piece. Peter can't die right now. Peter was miraculously released once before, in the early part of the book of Acts, and he was doing the will of God. He was doing the mission of God, and so now there was a jailing of Peter. Peter is supernaturally by angels released. Now, in chapter 12, Peter is imprisoned again by Herod, and now he's going to be supernaturally by angels released again. Herod wants to kill him, but there is the freeing of Peter, which is essential to fulfill the will of God, to fulfill the full calling that is on his life. So Peter has to be saved. Esther cannot die. Esther is the one that is a beacon of light in this time, a person in high authority that the people need. The people need Esther. They cannot continually get favor, because before this time, what we're seeing is King Cyrus favors the people of God, and then, the next king doesn't. Darius favors the people of God, and then next king doesn't. Then, finally we get Ahasuerus. They, trick him in the beginning, and as soon as Esther comes in, now we see that she's going to be the piece that he needs to ensure that the will of God is manifesting, that the protection on the chosen people are in position. And so the protection, it has to happen. So they're fasting. So like they fast for Peter, they're fasting and praying. They're praying and fasting for. They're praying for Peter. They're praying for Esther. And so this is vital. Because God responds to prayer. He responds to the prayers of the righteous. The effectual and fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And so God, he loves to hear the requests of the sons of God. He loves to hear the requests of those who are continually in his face, those who are diligently seeking him, those who are walking in a way, they're living in a light that resembles him, and he does supernatural things on their behalf. He does miracles. He's in their world, and they make requests that he answers because they are one with him. And so God is doing this work primarily for his glory, but he wants to share in his glory and ultimately bless the people of God that he's ordained to reflect his own light. So the stage is set to a degree, or the beginning stage is set in reference to the behind the scenes work in order to ensure that she knows that through faith she's going to go before this king that could sanction her death. She has to go confidently in the understanding that the God of Israel is going to protect her and listen to her. So favor is going to manifest because of not just who she is, but who she's tied to. She's tied to a legacy that is amazing. She's tied to something that ultimately resembles or is the very lineage that God is working through, the specific people that God is working through. And so God had raised up Esther for such a time as this. So in chapter 5, it says, and now it came to pass on the third day, right after the praying and fasting, that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner courts of the king's house over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near, so she came closer and touched the top of the scepter as a manifestation of her salvation. She touched salvation in a sense, because if she wasn't given the access, if she wasn't shown that she, in a sense, was the apple of his eye, she would have ultimately been cast off like Vashti prior to her. Um, so it says, then, verse 3, then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee, even given thee to the half of the kingdom. Wow, a great response. And great favor towards Esther. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet, and Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be given to thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is that I have found favor in thy sight, in the sight of the king. And if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. And so, Esther's stalling. Esther's stalling. This is, something that she's warming up to. She's warming the king up to this. She's not trying to spill the beans too early. She's not trying to say things that will be possibly questionable too early. She's trying to muster up the courage to communicate this, and so God's working through her, and she's positioning herself to be used of God to ensure that the corrupt plot against her life, against Mordecai's life, against the lives of the Israelites is unraveled, uncovered, so that the people can be saved and no longer individuals that will be assaulted and killed on that specific day. That the news, the paper had disclosed. And so going down, let's see here, it says, and then went Haman forth that day joyful. So Haman is joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself and went. When he came home, he sent and called his friends and Zeresh, his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself, and tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. And so he's disclosing of the privilege, of the access, of all of the different benefits that he's encountering because of King Ahasuerus, because of Esther, who's also showing him favor in reference to what he can see. And he's reveling. He's reveling in reference to the multitudes of things that he has, and the blessings that are coming to him. And so he, in his rage, is also building a building a these gallows. He's building this object of destruction, this object to hang people on for Mordecai. He wants to ensure that he gets Mordecai. He wants to kill him because of what he feels Mordecai's violation was against him. And so we see that the gallows, are made, and he is in a mode of celebration. But what we see is that God begins to show more of his fingerprints, begins to show more of his handiwork. And so in chapter 6, we see that the king cannot sleep. He is bothered. He wants to be read the chronicles. He wants to be read the very stories, the history of his actions, and what has taken place in his kingdom. And so he wants to read the chronicles. He wants it read to him, and so that he can be more comfortable, so that he can go to sleep afterwards in more of a peaceable fashion, and not be bothered by possible nightmares or whatever it is that was interrupting his sleep. And so we know that it was God that was interrupting his sleep, and God that was ensuring that he heard the right news from the chronicles that were written concerning his kingdom. And so in verse 2, it says, and it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh the two of the king's chamberlains that the keepers of the door who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this?" Then said the king's servants that servants that ministered unto him, "There is nothing done for him." So they answered that nothing was done for Mordecai in reward for what he had done in reference to the communicating of specific information that saved the king's life from the two individuals that wanted to take the king's life. And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, "Behold, Haman standeth in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than to myself? So we see here that it's a shift in the events. Haman is coming into the king to speak to the king about possibly hanging Mordecai. And he's already prepared gallows to hang Mordecai. And so God, the night before, allows the king not to sleep and causes the specific records of Mordecai's saving information to be read to him. And so now what's on the king's heart is to bless Mordecai. And so right when Haman comes in to ensure that he says the right words to hang Mordecai, the king speaks first and says that what should he do to the person who deserves honor, who did something noble, who did something righteous, who did something good concerning the king. And so Haman in his pride says to himself, "Oh, that must be me that he's talking about. It must be me that he wants to reward." And he's using language indirectly to, ask me what I want for myself. So I'm going to answer in such a way to where I give